A poor student marries a 60-year-old woman, and just 10 days later, he uncovers a secret that changes everything. Because not every marriage begins with love. Some vows are made for revenge, not for companionship. And sometimes what you inherit isn't fortune, but someone else's sins. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from. We hope you enjoy this unforgettable journey. The rain had been falling for hours, thick and cold like needles against the skin, turning the narrow streets of Ashford Hollow into a web of slick reflections. Eli Carter tightened his hood and kept pedaling through the storm, his fingers numb around the rusty handlebars of his old bicycle. The garage had closed late. He hadn't eaten. His jeans were soaked to the bone. All he wanted was to get home, heat up leftover beans, and sit beside his father's bed to make sure the old man hadn't had another coughing fit. The world around him felt gray and forgotten, the kind of night where the universe doesn't even bother to look down, but someone was watching. As he turned the corner near the abandoned toll road, a glimmer of silver pierced through the curtain of rain. A car. Not just any car. A Bentley. Parked awkwardly by the side of the road, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Strange. No one with that kind of money had business in this part of town. Eli slowed, hesitant. He wasn't the type to ignore someone in trouble, even if he was barely keeping his own head above water. He approached cautiously, water splashing beneath his boots, until he saw her. A woman stood beside the open hood, her silhouette elegant and composed even in the downpour. Her coat was tailored, dark gray with a fur collar, and her white hair was twisted neatly atop her head, untouched by the storm. She turned as he neared, her eyes sharp, lips curled into a restrained smile. "You're a rare sight," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate. A kind man on a hopeless night. Eli blinked the water from his lashes. "Flat battery?" he guessed. "Perhaps," she answered, stepping back. "I was hoping the car would fix itself, but here we are." He peered into the engine bay. Something wasn't right. The wires were cleanly disconnected. Not frayed, not snapped, not the result of wear. Intentional. But he said nothing. He just reattached them with practiced ease, closed the hood, and gave her a nod. "Try it now." The engine hummed to life like a purring beast. She smiled again, this time wider, and leaned against the door. "Would you allow me to repay you with a cup of coffee?" Eli hesitated. "I really should. I insist," she interrupted gently. "It's the least I can do. Besides, this storm doesn't look like it's letting up anytime soon." She gestured to a small cafe just across the street, one Eli had never noticed despite riding this route for years. Odd. He relented. Inside, the place was warm and softly lit. Jazz trickled from old speakers, and the waitress brought over 2 steaming cups without taking their order. Eli glanced around. Only one other couple sat in the corner. It was quiet. Too quiet. The woman stirred her coffee slowly, eyes on him the whole time. "You're a mechanic," she said. "But you carry yourself like a soldier. Who are you taking care of?" Eli stiffened slightly. "My father, he's sick. Business failed. I'm doing what I can." She nodded. "Harold Carter, that's your father, isn't it?" Eli looked up sharply. "Do I know you?" She chuckled softly. "Number. But small towns speak loudly. Besides, I do my research when someone touches my life." "Touched your life? I just fixed your car." She didn't answer directly. Debt can bury a man long before the grave does, but sometimes someone offers a ladder, even if it comes with a price. Eli frowned, unsure whether she was speaking metaphorically or threateningly, She reached into her purse and slid a black business card across the table. No name, no phone number, just an address embossed in silver, Langley Estate. If you ever want to breathe easier, stop by. We may have something to discuss. Before he could ask more, she stood, wrapped herself in her coat and walked out, leaving behind only the faint trace of jasmine and something darker, regret, maybe. Eli stared at the card for a long time. Outside, the rain hadn't slowed, but something in the air had shifted, the kind of shift you don't see until it's too late. Cut to black. Inside a large study filled with books and flickering shadows, the same woman, Vivian Langley, stepped out of her wet coat and placed it on a velvet chair. She walked over to a mahogany desk where a monitor flickered to life. On the screen, footage from the car camera showing Eli fixing her engine. Another window displayed his employment history, family medical records, and an old newspaper clipping. Harold Carter under investigation for investment fraud, case dismissed. Vivian's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. He thought he'd helped a stranger. He didn't know he'd just stepped into a 30-year-old war, and he was the final bullet. Langley Estate stood like a sleeping fortress on the edge of Ashford Hollow, all wrought iron gates and ivy-covered stone. It was the kind of place people drove by but never approached, the kind of house that had its own weather. Always darker, always quieter. Eli Carter stood in front of the gate the next afternoon, the black business card from the night before still clutched in his fingers. He'd told himself he wouldn't come. But here he was, soaked in sweat and uncertainty. He rang the bell. The gate opened without a word. Inside, the house was colder than it looked. Marble floors, oil paintings of people who'd long stopped smiling, and a grand staircase that wound like a spine through the center of the estate. A housekeeper greeted him, silent, rigid, and led him to a study where Vivian Langley was already seated, waiting, a cup of tea untouched before her. She didn't stand. She only gestured to the chair opposite her. You came. That means you're curious or desperate. Eli hesitated, then sat. Maybe both. Vivian studied him. Desperation is not a weakness, Eli. It's a kind of clarity. It tells us what we're willing to trade. Eli shifted in his seat. Trade for what? She set her teacup down and leaned forward slightly. I have a proposition. One that could end your struggles, wipe your debt clean, and set your future on an entirely new path. He narrowed his eyes. What kind of job are you offering? Marriage, she said flatly. To me. The room fell silent. A single tick from the grandfather clock echoed like a shot. Eli blinked. Excuse me? You heard me, Vivian said. I want to marry you, legally, no romance, no expectations, just a signature and some patience. In return, I pay off every cent your father owes, cover your future, and when I die, everything I own becomes yours. Eli leaned back, scoffing. Is this a joke? No, she replied coolly. This is a solution. You said you're drowning. I'm offering you land. Eli stared at her, searching for some sign of manipulation or madness, but she looked calm. Too calm. Why me? He finally asked. Why not someone else? Vivian's expression didn't change. Because you're clean, no marriage, no criminal record. You're local, you're unknown, but most of all, you're a Carter. And that matters to me. He flinched slightly. So you do know my father? Oh, I know him, she said, her voice like ice breaking underfoot. But this isn't about him. This is about you. Do you want to stay broke, or do you want to breathe? Eli stood. This is insane. Vivian didn't stop him. She simply said, the offer stands until sundown tomorrow. That night, Eli lay awake in the small, crumbling house he called home, staring at the peeling ceiling. His father coughed in the next room. a deep, sick sound that reminded him how little time they had. The electricity had gone out again. He couldn't remember the last time they had a full fridge. And yet, marriage? With a woman old enough to be his mother? What kind of life was that? Was it a trap? Was it pity? Or was it something darker? But by sunrise, as his father's coughing turned into wheezing sobs, Eli made his choice. He returned to Langley Estate at noon. Vivian was waiting in the garden, pruning roses with silver shears. She looked up and saw him, her face unreadable. "So?" Eli hesitated. "You'll cover everything?" "All of it," she said, snipping another perfect bloom. "Debts, legal fees, health care, even your future." "And what do you want in return?" he asked. "Your name on my paperwork, your silence, and your patience." "How long?" "Until I die." Eli clenched his jaw. "And if that's 30 years from now?" "Then you'll be 30 years richer. And your father will have died in peace." He didn't speak for a long time. Then, "I'll do it." Vivian didn't smile. She just nodded once and said, "The lawyer will be here tomorrow." Some chains don't feel like chains when they're gold-plated, but they still drag you under. The morning of the ceremony came with fog so thick the sun never showed. There was no music, no friends, no priest. Just papers, a witness, and silence. Eli signed without fanfare. Vivian did the same. The lawyer never looked up. At exactly 11 a.m., they were married. No kiss, no vows, just a contract sealed by ink and quiet agreement. The only thing louder than the silence was the sound of the pen scratching across paper. An hour later, Eli stood in front of Langley Estate again, but this time with a suitcase in hand and a key in his pocket. He told himself it was temporary, a calculated move. But something about the way the iron gate closed behind him made it feel permanent. The house hadn't changed, still gray, still heavy. But now it belonged in part to him. Or so he thought. The staff didn't speak unless spoken to. 3 of them, all older, all precise. They moved like shadows, present but never in the way. The air inside the mansion was colder than the autumn wind outside. Each hallway seemed longer than the last. Rooms were too large, ceilings too high, furniture too untouched. It wasn't just the absence of mess. It was the absence of life. No photos, no clutter, no stories on the shelves, just order, wealth, and quiet. Eli was assigned a room on the 2nd floor, clean, minimalist, with a view of the forest. The bed was made. The closet was empty. A single note rested on the pillow. "Dinner is served at 7. Attendance is expected." He unpacked slowly, listening to the stillness. Even the floorboards didn't creak. It felt less like moving into a home and more like being installed in a system. At dinner, Vivian sat at the far end of a long mahogany table. 2 silver candlesticks flickered between them. No music, no conversation. She simply nodded when he arrived, cut her food with surgical precision, and ate in silence. When he tried to speak, she interrupted. "Eat, rest, we'll talk in time." He obeyed. This pattern repeated. Breakfast at 8, dinner at 7. Always at that table. Always with Vivian seated in the exact same chair. They never touched, never joked, never shared. The only thing exchanged was eye contact, and even that was brief. Days passed like this. Routine, sterile, controlled. And still, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. One evening, he wandered deeper into the mansion. Room after room, libraries with locked cabinets, guest rooms untouched, a music room with no sheet music. In one hallway, he found a door that didn't open, no handle. Just a brass keyhole and a nameplate with no name. Later that night, he asked the housekeeper, Martha, the only one who ever met his eyes, Was this house always this empty? She paused, holding a silver tray. Empty is safer. Did Mrs. Langley ever have a family? Martha looked over her shoulder before whispering, Everyone leaves this house eventually, one way or another. Then she walked away. At dinner, Eli broke the routine. Do you have children? He asked. Vivian didn't look up. She placed her fork down with precision. They're all gone, she said, and I prefer it that way. Her voice didn't rise, but something beneath it felt sharp, like a blade pressed against the skin without breaking it. Eli swallowed his next question. That night he dreamt of footsteps down the hall, of locked doors and muffled cries. But when he woke, the house was as silent as ever. Too silent. Some houses echo with laughter, others with memories. This one only echoes with what it's trying to forget. 3 weeks passed. The mansion remained a monument to silence, and Vivian Langley remained unreadable. She moved like clockwork, precise, controlled, untouchable. Eli began to notice that even time inside the estate felt different. Hours didn't pass. They circled, looping in a rhythm too perfect to be natural. Each hallway looked the same, each door held the same weight, and every time he passed that locked one with no name, something inside him stirred. A question, unformed but relentless. Then, one afternoon, everything cracked open. He was in the west corridor, a wing rarely lit, when he noticed a faint breeze. Cold, intentional. It was coming from a door that had been slightly ajar, something that had never happened before. The house was too disciplined for accidents. He stepped in. It was an office, old and untouched. The dust settled like velvet on the shelves. But the desk was clean. Recent, active. A single drawer slid open with surprising ease, and inside lay a leather-bound folder stamped with gold initials, LHC. He opened it. Stock certificates, old bank statements, a contract. Langley Holdings, 1999. Partner, Harold Carter. The blood in Eli's hands drained as fast as the rain had poured that night he met Vivian. His father's name was on the paper, in ink that still looked wet, still looked guilty. The contract detailed an investment merger between Harold Carter and Langley Holdings. It was supposed to launch a real estate empire, but across the final page were red slashes. Void. Fraud. Trial dismissed. His eyes moved faster than his mind could follow. Below is a scrawled note written in angry penmanship. He took everything. My son vanished. My husband never came home. Eli stepped back, folder in hand, his breath shallow. The house around him felt suddenly alive, like it had been holding its breath for this exact moment. He shoved the papers under his jacket and slipped back to his room, locking the door and listening for footsteps. But there were none, just that maddening silence. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he left the mansion before dawn, rode his bike through freezing fog, and arrived at a bar on the edge of town by sunrise. Inside, behind a booth soaked in age and whiskey, sat Shelby Crane, his father's oldest business partner, now just a name in town everyone tried to forget. Eli bought him a drink, and another. By the third glass, Shelby finally said it. Your father was smart, too smart. Knew how to write contracts people couldn't understand until it was too late. Eli didn't blink. Did he steal from her? Shelby hesitated. He promised Vivian and her husband a full merger. Told them he'd handle the capital while they handled the land. But he moved the money, froze their shares. By the time she caught on, everything was tied up under his name. The courts couldn't untangle it in time. Her husband, he blamed himself, put a bullet in his head. Their son disappeared, just like that. Eli sat motionless, the bar lights flickering above him like truth burning through old lies. She lost everything, Shelby added, and no one paid for it. When Eli returned to the mansion, the door creaked louder. The air is thicker. Vivian was waiting in the dining room, though it wasn't time for dinner. She was already seated in a single place set across from her. A second glass of wine, as if she knew. "You found it," she said without looking up. Eli didn't answer. "You know who your father really was." He sat slowly. Vivian's eyes didn't blink. "And now you know why you're here." He thought he married into a secret, but he was born into it. Some names don't echo, they haunt. The next morning, the sky above Langley Estate was gray and unmoving, as if the clouds themselves had stopped breathing. Eli sat in the corner of his room, the leather folder still hidden beneath the floorboard. Sleep had come in fragments. His father's name kept echoing in his mind, once spoken with pride, now with weight. In the silence between dreams, Vivian's words haunted him. "Now you know why you're here." He wanted to leave, to pack his bags and vanish, but every door in that mansion led back to the same truth. He was bound, not by love, but by inheritance, and the chain had already tightened. At breakfast, the table was set as usual, but Vivian was not alone. Beside her sat a man in a dark suit, thin, precise, with eyes that looked like they'd read more fine print than daylight. "Eli," she said, without preamble. "This is Mr. Gallows. He's here to help formalize your role in the estate. Simple paperwork, a formality." Mr. Gallows gave a practiced nod. "It's best to handle these transitions early, prevents future complications." Eli hesitated. "What kind of transitions?" Vivian answered smoothly. "Asset protection. Tax clarity. You're my legal spouse now. It's time to make that real on paper." They moved to the study, the same room where Eli had found the folder. Now the desk was cleared and polished, the papers already laid out in 2 neat stacks. Eli picked up the first page. Legal jargon bled across the paper like ink on wet skin. He read, or tried to. Clauses, subsections, and references to prior arrangements. It might as well have been in another language. "This one," Gallows pointed, "simply updates beneficiary designations. And this confirms your agreement to jointly hold all financial liabilities and pending estate obligations. Standard protection." The words sank in slowly. "Jointly hold financial liabilities." Eli looked up. "Wait, why would I be responsible for debts?" "I thought It's procedural," Vivian interrupted. "Nothing is changing. It just ensures continuity if anything happens." The pen was in his hand before he realized. Cold metal, smooth, heavy. Eli stared at the signature line. His name was already typed beneath it. He glanced back at Vivian. She didn't speak, didn't blink. Her silence said everything. "Sign it. Be who you promise to be." A pulse pounded behind his eyes. He could walk away, or he could write his name and let all of this surreal life, this mansion, this pact, solidify into something unbreakable. He signed. Mr. Gallows packed the papers, nodded, and left without a sound. Vivian stood by the window, her reflection faint in the glass, eyes fixed on the distant tree line. Eli stood behind her. "What did I just sign?" Her answer came without turning around. "Responsibility." That night, he sat on the edge of his bed, heart thudding. He went back to the study, locked the door, and rummaged through the desk. No duplicates, no scans, nothing is left behind. It was all gone, just like that. He opened his laptop and tried to search the clauses, the phrases he remembered, but everything was too vague, too buried behind layers of legal abstraction. His phone rang. Unknown number. He didn't answer. He was already drowning. And somewhere, in another wing of the house, behind another locked door, Vivian stood alone with a fire burning in the hearth. She held a copy of the document he'd signed. Her thumb brushed lightly over his signature, and her voice, soft but sharp, filled the room like smoke. And just like your father, you never read the fine print. Blood doesn't always spill from wounds. Sometimes it pours from contracts, signed in trust, bled in silence. The rain returned the next morning, but this time it wasn't gentle. It battered the windows of Langley Estate like a warning, as if the sky itself had grown tired of silence. Eli Carter stood in front of the mirror, the face looking back at him no longer familiar. His eyes were heavier, his jaw tighter, his hands less steady. Somewhere between survival and surrender, he had become something else. Not a man living in comfort, but a man buried in velvet quicksand. The contract he'd signed 3 days ago still echoed in his mind, each clause like a hidden blade. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. The moment he wrote his name, something changed. Something shifted. And now he needed proof. He didn't go to breakfast. Instead, he slipped down the hall toward the east wing, Vivian's wing, where most doors remained locked and most questions went unanswered. The hallway smelled of old wood and lavender polish, but beneath that was something sterile, digital, modern. At the far end, a steel door half concealed behind a tapestry opened to a narrow staircase. It led down into the bones of the estate, where the stone walls pressed close and the light turned artificial. A room with servers hummed in a constant whisper, monitors glowing with security feeds. One showed the main gate. Another is the dining room. Another, the study, the exact desk where he had signed. He sat. His hands trembled slightly as he scrubbed backward through the timeline. Afternoon sun, the clink of a teacup. Mr. Gallows is arranging papers. Himself leaning over to sign. He paused, watched, rewatched. Then, there it was. After he signed and walked out with Gallows, the feed showed Vivian returning. Alone. Calm. She walked to the desk, opened a drawer, pulled out a different stack of papers, nearly identical in appearance, and placed them into the same envelope. Her movements were slow, deliberate, ritualistic, as if she had done this before, as if the entire room had been waiting for this scene. Eli recoiled from the screen, his breath hitched, his signature wasn't what he thought it was. She had swapped the documents. The liabilities were never shared. They were his. All of them. He downloaded the footage onto a USB and pocketed it. But the room had grown colder. Behind him, a click echoed. A door, a step, a presence. He turned slowly. Vivian stood at the threshold, eyes sharp, arms crossed. "You found it," she said, her voice devoid of surprise. "Curiosity's a dangerous trait, Eli. It runs in families." Eli held his ground. "You forged the papers." "No," she replied calmly. "I substituted the truth. You just didn't read close enough to know the difference. That's illegal." "Is it?" she asked, stepping into the room. "Or is it just cruel?" He took a step back. "I have evidence." "And who will believe you?" she countered. "A mechanic from nowhere? Or Vivian Langley, philanthropist, survivor, widow?" Her voice darkened. "You carry your father's face, his blood, his entitlement. Do you think the world will side with you? They'll see the video. You think I haven't prepared for that?" She smiled faintly. "You're not the first Carter I've beaten." Eli pushed past her, heart racing, mind screaming. The walls of the mansion seemed to narrow as he moved. Every chandelier, every painting, every hallway now felt like a trap, not home, not safety, a stage, a cage, and he'd just found the key. But it wasn't over. He needed help. That night, outside the estate, under cover of fog and fear, Eli slipped through the hedges and pedaled into town. He arrived at a small law office tucked between a pawn shop and a dry cleaner. Noah Brooks, his childhood friend, now a quiet but brilliant attorney who had always believed the law was a weapon if you knew how to aim it. Eli placed the USB on the desk. "Tell me I have a case." Noah watched the video, his expression shifting from confusion to fury to focus. "If this is real, she committed contract fraud, document tampering. You didn't just sign a bad deal, you were deceived." Eli exhaled for the first time in days, but the relief was short-lived. Noah leaned in. "The video's your only weapon. You need to protect it. If she suspects you've shared it, she'll strike back." Eli nodded. "She already has. The truth is only powerful when it's free, and sometimes freedom comes down to a single file, and a man brave enough to run with it." The house was too quiet. That was the first warning. Not the kind of quiet that comes from solitude, but the kind that arrives just before something breaks. Eli Carter moved through Langley Estate like a man walking on cracked ice, cautious, deliberate, aware that every step could be the one that plunges him into darkness. The USB was in his pocket, warm against his thigh, pulsing like a second heartbeat. The hallway lights flickered once. He didn't stop to ask why. He took the servants' stairs, the ones that groaned slightly and curved just wide enough to see around the bend. No footsteps yet, no alarms. But Vivian knew. She had known the moment he left the surveillance room. She always knew. That's how the game worked. She controlled the board, the rules, the silence. But this time, he had something she couldn't silence. Proof. He crossed the marble foyer with blood in his mouth and fear in his spine. Just 10 more steps to the side door. Just 10. It opened, not the one ahead, behind. 2 men stepped in, dressed in black, broad, silent, trained, Vivian's men. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. One reached forward. Eli ran. His boots slipped once on the polished floor, but he didn't fall. He turned sharply down the west corridor, knocked over a vase that shattered like gunfire, and sprinted up the back stairs 2 steps at a time. He heard them follow. Heavy, precise, calculated, like they'd done this before. He burst into the study, locked the door, and dragged a chair under the handle. It wouldn't last. His hands shook as he ripped open drawers, scattering old papers and clipped keys. He found the hard drive, plugged it in, dragged the video file to another USB. 30 seconds. Come on. The doorknob rattled. Then the wood cracked. 20 seconds. The chair buckled. 15. Vivian's voice rang through the door, not screaming, just calm, cold. "Eli, don't make this worse." He ignored her. The loading bar inched forward. 92%. One last groan from the door, and it gave. The chair snapped. The men pushed in. Eli grabbed the USB and dove sideways through the tall window, glass exploding around him like shrapnel. He didn't feel the cuts, just the cold rush of air as his body slammed onto the wet lawn below. His ankle twisted, fire shooting up his leg, but he moved, crawled, ran. Vivian appeared on the second-floor balcony, her coat billowing behind her, eyes sharp as winter. "Stop him," she said. Not yelled, commanded. Eli made it to the garden wall. A hand grabbed his collar. One of the guards yanked him back. Fist raised, then a spotlight. Voices. "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" The grip on his collar loosened. Eli hit the ground hard and rolled over, blinking against the brightness. A dozen figures emerged from the fog. Noah at the front, his coat soaked through, eyes locked on him. Behind him, police. Vivian stood frozen on the balcony, the wind snapping at her coat. The lead officer stepped forward. "Vivian Langley, we have a warrant. You're under investigation for contract fraud, document tampering, and coercion." For the first time since Eli met her, Vivian looked small. Not broken, but no longer untouchable. Her voice, when it came, cracked at the edges. "You can't take this from me." The officer didn't flinch. "You already gave it up the moment you thought no one would fight back." They handcuffed her on the marble steps she once ruled like a throne. Eli sat in the wet grass, mud soaking into his shirt, heart pounding. He had escaped. But not clean, not unscarred, just free, for now. Some gates don't just keep people out, they keep the truth in. And sometimes escape doesn't feel like victory, it just feels like survival. Langley Estate didn't make a sound when they took her away. No screaming, no struggle, just the click of steel on wrist bones and the soft crunch of gravel under polished shoes. Eli watched from the grass, soaked and shivering, as Vivian Langley, once untouchable, once impenetrable, was led through the gates she had ruled for decades. The wind stirred her hair. Her eyes never met his, and then she was gone. The days that followed were quieter than the ones before, but it wasn't peace, it was something else. The kind of quiet that fills a room after something sacred has been shattered. The police came back with boxes, warrants, and gloves. They pulled documents from drawers, drives from hidden safes, and names from her files that matched too many ruined lives. Eli signed statements, gave interviews, and pointed to the USB like it was a severed snake's head. And yet, he felt no triumph, just weight. He returned to his father's bedside that same week. Harold Carter looked older and weaker, but smiled when he saw his son alive. "You look like hell," he whispered. "I've been living there," Eli replied, voice hoarse. He didn't tell him everything, just enough. Enough for Harold's smile to falter, for his hands to tremble, for his eyes to wet. Not with regret, but with something worse. Shame. Vivian's trial never made national headlines, but the town watched and whispered. They called it poetic, a reckoning. But Eli knew better. It wasn't justice, it was fallout. And fallout never chooses where it lands. The court ruled in his favor. The fraudulent contracts were voided. The estate, what was left of it, was turned over to creditors in legal war zones. Eli took nothing. Not the house, not the money, not even the name. He moved back into town, into a small rented apartment above a bookstore, and applied for law school. He wanted to understand the contracts, not just the ones that steal money, but the ones that steal people. The invisible ink of obligation, manipulation, and omission. He read everything. Ethics, precedent, the things no one had taught his father, the things no one had protected Vivian from. One gray morning, nearly a year later, a letter arrived. No return address, no markings. Just his name, written in cursive that shook like old hands. He opened it. "Live differently from your father. That's all I ask." No signature, no apology, just that one sentence. He folded it once, placed it in the drawer beneath his coffee mug and bar exam notes, and never opened it again. Not out of anger, but because some truths only need to be read once. Justice silences the noise, but only forgiveness quiets the soul. Eli Carter woke before the alarm most mornings now. Not from nightmares, not from guilt, but from habit. A rhythm built out of discipline and memory. He made his coffee the same way every day, black with one sugar, and sat by the window of his small apartment above the bookstore, watching the street slowly come alive. It was quieter than Langley Estate, but quieter in a way that didn't suffocate, just breathed. Outside, people moved without secrets. Doors opened and closed without echoing down marbled halls, and when the mail arrived, it came without threats. That was the life he chose now. Simple, measured, earned. Law school was harder than he expected. Not because of the reading or the exams, but because every page reminded him of what he had survived. Every contract he studied whispered of signatures traded for freedom. Every precedent spoke of people who trusted too easily. But he kept going, because understanding was the only weapon left, and he wasn't going to let ignorance be inherited. Sometimes he passed by the gate of what used to be Langley Estate. It was locked now, overgrown. No one lived there, just vines and rumors. He never went past the fence, not because he was afraid, but because some doors aren't meant to be reopened, even with the right key. He thought of Vivian Langley less often than he thought he would, but when he did, it wasn't with rage. It was with a sadness he couldn't quite name. She had been powerful, sharp, tragic. He still didn't forgive what she'd done, but he understood why she did it, and sometimes that was enough. His father died peacefully 6 months after the trial. They buried him in the same cemetery where Vivian's husband had been laid decades earlier, just 50 feet apart, separated by 2 lifetimes of betrayal. Eli didn't speak at the funeral. He just stood beside the grave, hands in his pockets, wind cold on his cheeks, and promised himself one thing: the pain would stop with him. A year later, Eli graduated with honors. On the day he passed the bar, he went home, opened the drawer where the letter still rested, untouched, and read it again. Just once more. Live differently from your father. That's all I ask. He folded it back carefully, but this time, instead of putting it away, he burned it. Not in anger, in closure. The flame was small, the ash light. The silence that followed was the kind that healed. He stood by the window again, this time as a man no longer haunted, but quietly determined. Forgiveness wasn't a gift he gave to Vivian. It was the gift he gave himself, because hate is a cage you lock from the inside. And Eli Carter had spent too long behind doors he didn't choose. We don't choose where we come from, but we choose what we carry forward. Some inherit wealth, some inherit ruin, but the bravest inherit pain, and choose not to pass it on. Eli Carter's story wasn't just about a strange marriage or revenge decades in the making. It was a quiet reminder that every choice we make, whether born of love, duty, or regret, leaves its mark on the lives we touch. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means choosing not to let it define us. Because when we release the weight of vengeance, we don't free others. We free ourselves. Life doesn't require us to become our parents, but it gives us the power to live differently, with kindness, with clarity, and with intention. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. If this story moved you, share it forward. Sometimes passing on kindness is the most powerful thing we can do. We'll see you in the next story.